Welcome to Minority Trip Report. MTR is a podcast spotlighting stories of personal transformation and underrepresented leaders in mental health, psychedelics, and consciousness. I'm your host, Raj Siraj. If you're learning from or enjoying Minority Trip Report, please subscribe to MTR on YouTube at Minority Trip Report and follow us on Instagram at Minority Trip. Thank you and enjoy the episode. Today, my guest is Stephanie Wang, who is the founder and CEO of Empathogenics, who has the mission to restore full spectrum aliveness for all beings. Ka offers 100% plant-based empathogenic supplements featuring Kanna, a heart-opening succulent from South Africa that is clinically proven to activate an immediate sense of grounded energy, helping people feel more alive, capable, and connected as they navigate everyday stress. Previously, Stephanie was the president of the Alchemist Kitchen and director of Evolver, a conscious lifestyle company in New York, as well as a documentary and narrative film producer. A native Hong Konger, Stephanie began her career in corporate finance on Wall Street and was the #1 ranked equity analyst in the retail sector with HSBC Securities Hong Kong. Stephanie, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks, Rad, for having
Of course, you have had very varied career, so there's lots to dig into. But where I want to start first is what is Kanna? Now, I might have heard about Kanna here and there, but I always confused it with kava. So I think there's something to talk about there. My partner and I recently tried Kanna. Thanks for sending those samples. And I found it really interesting when analogy you drew was with MDMA. There was this heart opening experience. Now I think my partner got the dosage wrong, so we'll have to work on that. But let's start there. What is Kanna?
Kanna is a succulent plant from South Africa, and it's been used by the indigenous there, the Khoi Khoi and the San people traditionally, since for thousands of years, really. It has always been central to their society medicinally, and also they use it for celebration when they go into trance
Mm,
dancing, for divination on higher doses when they want to speak with their ancestors or connect with the divine. They also take it, or they used to take it when they went on multi-day hunts, again, for its sort of calming and sedative qualities for stress, but also a combined effect, which is really unusual, where they also feel a grounded energy as well, a sense of that. And so Kana was used by them to enhance stamina and endurance. And while they went on multi-day hunts, which is really interesting, Kana also has this ability to suppress hunger and thirst and regulate that. So it's great again for helping the body, support the body and the mind going through any kind of stressful situation, be it physical or mental. And this plant this plant grows in the drier regions of the Cape provinces in Southern Africa, especially in the Karoo Desert, and it also grows in Namibia.
mm,
And it's a plant that has like beautiful flowering white, yellow, or pink flowers. And it's a succulent, like I said. It likes to grow in dry areas, but also likes to always grow in pairs or together with another plant. So it's interesting. The reason I'm also bringing the ecology up is because oftentimes if you understand a plant and how it grows, it gives you actually a lot of information as to how you can build a relationship with it and
mm,
what it might be
mm,
great for in terms of your health, in terms of helping you with whatever ailments you might have. And in this case, for example, kakana grows in deserty regions and dry areas, and that also gives you a sense of how
mm,
resilient it is. And when it's actually dying, it actually becomes more and more potent medicinally. That also tells you something. So it's in a way not surprising that Kana is very helpful for supporting stress and anxiety and also helps bring more calm and into your life. So this particular plant has many, many different, and that also makes it really unique. I mentioned some of the uses of how the indigenous would take it. So they would take it to celebrate because it's a euphoriant as well. It gives you that uplift. It gives you a sense of grounded energy while it's also calming brain activity. So you're chill, but you're in a
mm.
great mood. And that's because it acts as a serotonin reuptake inhibitor as well as a serotonin releasing agent. So because of the way it activates a certain protein called VMAT2, which is a protein that helps transport neurotransmitters out of cells, that way it actually helps bring more serotonin into the body. and it's also a serotonin reuptake
Mm,
inhibitor. So it's both. And it also activates many other receptors, as I mentioned. For example, receptors for GABA, for opioids, for cholecystokinin, for melatonin. So what that means also is that if you take it regularly, it also helps promote great sleep quality because of how it activates receptors for melatonin. It's how it, for example, activates the receptors for cholecystokinin means that it helps prevent gut inflammation and also helps regulate hedonic
mm.
cravings. So hedonic cravings are essentially any kind of excessive craving where it's not like your body needs the food, but you cannot help but like eat. So it's kind of like when we reach for that one potato chip, but we end up eating that's that's excessive hedonic craving. Again, because of how Kanna's alkaloids work, it really helps to actually
Mm.
regulate these cravings. And so it kind of does a thing where it resets your brain a little bit.
It's interesting. You said that it's used for hunting and divination. The divination part makes sense because you drew a parallel to MDMA as well. And with MDMA, sometimes I think this is a conversation we had before, is that it's easy to feel very exuberant and ecstatic. And I think you almost become overwhelmed by the experience. So, and sometimes it tends to exaggerate what you might feel, right? So, case in point, everything's lovey dovey, cuddle puddle, and then next day you're like, well, I can't imagine hanging out with this person again. So it's with Kana, it feels a lot more grounded and pragmatic, for the lack of a better word. And it's interesting because using something for both that is relaxing, calming, but also for hunting, it feels like it still keeps the senses sharp. So you're very present in the conversations or the moments, while
Mhm.
also sedating you a little bit, right?
Yes, absolutely. And thanks for bringing that up because another huge aspect of Kanna is it improves cognitive
Mm,
function, memory, focus, problem solving ability. And it's also important to really make a distinction between Kanna and MDMA because I know that's a comparison that
hmm
is made
hmm
a lot. There's a meme out there that Kanna is
Yeah.
nature's MDMA. So the in terms of how they're similar, they are both empathogenic in the sense that they both open your heart. The way MDMA is, it's a kind of like a
hmm
extreme a version of that heart opening versus Kanna. So just so people don't take Kanna and expect that it's gonna be like MDMA, it's not. But I also wanna emphasize some of the differences because they have important health indications. So MDMA, as many know, it's not advisable to take it continuously, regularly, because it will damage your your nervous system. And Kanna is actually very neuroprotective. It is actually completely the opposite. And I mentioned earlier how it works on multiple receptors. It's also so for example, with Kanna, if you take it, even if it's on a really high dose, there is no
mm,
crash. And one of the reasons is because it works on so many different receptors, and it's also adaptogenic, which again is super unusual for something that's, I guess, psychoactive and has all these other benefits. So it means being adaptogenic means that there's no
hmm
toxicity and you actually can take it every day. That's extremely, extremely different from what MDMA is like. And I'm not taking away what MDMA
hmm
can do for people because MDMA therapy is and treatment is really works for a lot of people, especially with people with trauma. But I just wanna make that distinction because if you think they're the same or very similar, they absolutely are not. So and the great thing about Kanna is that it's much safer in that sense because MDMA also has a lot of it can have a lot of negative and
hmm
dangerous side effects, and also including addiction, whereas Kanna also is non-addictive. And what's interesting because Kanna is actually used to treat addiction in Southern Africa traditionally, especially for alcohol abuse. And in fact, there is an Afrikaans saying or an Afrikaans name for Kanna called "Ons droë drank," which means our dry
mm,
drink. So it's in lieu of alcohol, you take
Interesting.
Kanna to celebrate time. And the I mean, one thing I know we mentioned the whole lovey-dovey thing, but that empathogenic aspect is also bears reiterating because what it's doing when we're saying that it's heart opening is it really eases
Mm,
social connection. It it eases connecting with yourself and also with others. So whether you're finding and discovering and unveil feelings that maybe you've pushed down in a way and not
Mm-hmm.
wanted to experience or feel, it actually brings all those feelings up. So that's why we always say at Ka, it's like feel the feels, feel yourself.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean? Most of us are just like in our heads. We're just like, oh my God, gotta keep, gotta keep working, gotta keep
Mm-hmm.
pushing. And we don't give ourselves time, that space to really be with ourselves. And I think one of the big gifts of Kanna is doing that. It's actually opening up space for us to be with ourselves and also just to process all those feelings that need to come out, right? And another beautiful thing is that it helps us connect with another person, but it's really hard to connect with another when you're not even connected to
Right.
yourself, right? Because you're
Mm-hmm.
not even here. There's no presence. So Kana is beautiful that way because it really brings you into presence through the heart. And I like to think of it from a shamanic standpoint. Kana is considered heart medicine, which means it brings you into consciousness through
Mm-hmm.
the heart. So it doesn't take you out of the body. Whereas psilocybin and, for example, ayahuasca are amazing psychedelics, but the way they work with you in consciousness is they're considered spirit medicine. They take you out of the
Mm-hmm.
body. So you're doing you're doing that dance up there, still having amazing insights, but it works very differently. For me, I would say I love Kana so much, not that I don't enjoy the other psychedelics. And again, in case people are wondering, Kana is not psychedelic. It's psychoactive, but not psychedelic, meaning there are no visuals, there's no hallucinations. You don't lose track of space and time. It's sober. You can take it when you go to work. You can take it on a daily basis. And I do it. I take Kana before I start the day because it just helps ground me and keeps me even keeled so I don't get overwhelmed. I'm not as stressed out. And it actually helps definitely support my cognitive
Mm-hmm.
function. It supports me in my executive function, especially where I'm sharper for
So
sure.
it's
So,
psychoactive in the same way that coffee is psychoactive. Not to say they have the same effect, but they're psychoactive without being psychedelic, right? So they're state altering
correct,
in that
correct.
way.
Exactly.
I was very ignorant and confused Kana and Kava very often until I met you and you educated me what Kana is. Tell me a little bit about how Kana and Kava are different.
Sure, absolutely. But before I even go there, Rad,
Mm,
there was another important point I didn't
mm,
mention earlier about the difference between MDMA and Kana. So MDMA also has
mhm,
amphetamines, right? So it's a very different. Kana does not have that. So and then just to be clear, MDMA has much stronger effect. It's going to be a much more how to say it's a bigger experience if you're looking for that like mega heart opening. But that's not to say that Kanna won't give you something else. It's a very subtle
mhm,
plant, and it works that way, a very powerful
mhm,
way, especially over time if you microdose it. It's incredible. So in terms of kava kava, kava kava is also a beautiful plant that's from the Pacific Islands originally, right? And it's also a sedative. It gives people a feeling of relaxation, a little bit of euphoria. And it's also been used in ceremony and it's been used by humans for hundreds
mhm,
of years at least. Kava kava is a natural MAOI, and it's different in the sense I think the biggest difference is in terms of how it's processed in the liver. And kava kava, again, is one of those plants that, and there's so many kava bars you can go and grab a kava drink at. The thing to be careful of is just, again, not to take it regularly because it will raise your liver enzymes and it will, with long term use, it can cause damage to your liver. So that's the one thing that is important to look out for. And also kava tends to also have it's a sedative and it doesn't have that cognitive sharpening at all, like effect, unlike Kana, which does. And it's euphoric, but I would not call kava a heart opener. It again works
mm,
differently in the
mhm.
body. But both of them definitely help you get into a more relaxed state, whereas I would say kava kava is definitely more sedative,
Interesting. They do have the
more
one thing in
sedating.
common, which is they're both unscheduled substances. Now, this is really interesting because you're building a company around an unscheduled substance, which is Kana. Tell me a little bit about what the mechanics of that are. Like, how do you build a company around a substance that is unscheduled and uncertain regulatory environment? That is not to say it is just because it is not legal doesn't make it illegal. You know what I mean? So I'm curious, how did you navigate that, and what are the mechanics and the complexities, regulatory wise, and also building a company around it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I also picked Kanna early on because it's legal in virtually all of the states in the US at least, except for one, which is Louis. It is legal
Okay.
everywhere that I know
Hmm.
internationally as well as in the US and Canada. The one thing is there's Louisiana is the only state
Hmm.
that does prohibit the sale of Kanna. But it's also to give you a little bit of sense of what that means. Louisiana also does not allow the sale of Damiana or
Hmm.
Blue Lotus. So, it's just I think you can maybe tell a little bit, maybe anything that is slightly expansive in
Yeah.
consciousness tends to get
It's of the
prohibited, but,
religious
I mean, I don't
folks.
know, again,
Hmm.
I should
Yeah.
I'm not sure, and I don't wanna conjecture, but it's interesting to note that. So, that was one of the big reasons because it is legal, and it's super interesting, it's psychoactive, has all of these big,
Hmm.
amazing benefits, and I also have been working personally with Kana for at least excuse me, at least 11 years at this point, and it was a big part of my own healing. So that's another reason why I chose that. I think in terms of navigating the let's say the FDA and the other aspects, thank goodness like Kana is not scheduled. There are also other companies out there that came before us that have taken or have been deriving products from Kana and kind of creating their own Kana brand. And they actually went through and did a ton of studies that are out there publicly. So they actually got, I believe they had, what is it called? It's basically not going through the whole FDA process.
It's like
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
voluntary. What can you say? You're being transparent, volunteer. You're volunteering more information, something like that. Okay, so you get the point that it would they're able to self certify, for the lack of a better word, in some way, and they can then market or sell these products. So right?
Correct. I mean, it just gives them much more
Mm-hmm.
credibility, and there's a lot of studies that have been
Mm-hmm.
that were done that actually show the efficacy of their
So
kana.
that's it. Was it? Is it challenging building a company because of the fact that it's unscheduled, or is it just like the complexities are really with building a CPG company, just like anywhere else?
The complexities are related really more with the fact that it's a
Got
CPG
it.
company. I would say that there definitely is an aspect, but I think in our case that is really different because of the way Kana just is not
Mm,
scheduled, legal, and there are also companies who have self-certified GRAS. So GRAS is GRAS, generally recognized as safe is what it represents. And there are companies that actually can do self-certification to show that the Grana is safe, and like I said, Zembrin actually is the company that did that. And so it's a lot they've really
mm,
paved the road for I think a lot of us later on who are actually
mhm,
manufacturing or
mhm,
producing these products to make it a lot easier in
mhm.
a way. There's a little bit never know with the FDA, right? But it just gives us I would say it makes it less risky for us. And the rest of it, thinking about how we've launched and how we've grown in the last year and 8 months has been really basing everything on us as a CPG
Mhm.
company. But I think what the interesting area was a little where we struggled a little bit, with earlier on is exactly that question, like, are we a CPG company or are we a psychedelic company? But we're not psychedelic, but then we're so related to the psychedelic culture, how does that work? And I think it was actually one of the reviewers from Stackshot, who's amazing. They review amazing publication really spots the trends, and they actually spotted us and called us a psychedelic adjacent company, which we are. So that was, like, actually very
Mhm.
helpful to think of us as psychedelic adjacent. So culturally, we still belong in many ways to the psychedelic culture, but really, we're for
Right.
everyone, for simply because we're psychoactive, not psychedelic, and we're also legal, and but it's this beautiful, exciting moment where you have plant medicines that are out there. They're not psychedelic, that are legal, that are now being incorporated into someone's daily health
Mm.
routine, right? I mean, that mushrooms, and I'm not talking about psilocybin, I'm talking about just like,
Functional mushrooms,
mushroom.
adaptogens, and yeah, yeah.
Exactly, adaptogens and such. So, you see that trend definitely booming, and I think part of that is also, and I love the functional mushroom companies out there because it's also, they're also preparing for the
Mhm.
day where or psilocybin or some other psychoactive mushrooms will become legal.
I think it's really
So
interesting and fascinating, and we're gonna touch more on this in the last part of the interview, which is building this brand new brand category, right? Sort of like psychedelic adjacent. What the hell does that even mean, right? When we talk about psychoactive versus what does that mean? There's a lot of awareness building and community building that's involved here, and I think that's
yes.
both the opportunity and the challenge, of course, right? But I before we talk about that, I want to pivot a little bit to about you personally. Now, your bio says that you were at one point the number one equity analyst in the retail sector for HSBC in Hong Kong. You were also a filmmaker at one point and a producer. I'm curious, how does one go from filmmaking to being an analyst at a pretty well-known firm? And as I was joking, being an equity analyst or the number one equity analyst is just a proxy for how stressful life can be. Tell me a little bit about that world and that part of your life, that time in your life. What was that like? And how did you get into that? How did you get out of it? If you got out of it, I don't know. Like, or was it a smooth transition? Was it a more abrupt thing? What was it like?
Wow, that was, like, many lifetimes ago. I went to university, I went to Wharton, I studied business. It was the thing to do, especially then, especially with the kind of background that I grew up in. I grew up in Hong Kong and had very conservative parents, and they were basically like, "Be a doctor or a lawyer or an accountant. Just go into business, but just don't, please don't do anything impractical. Thank you very much." So, I was definitely, turning towards finance as a career choice. And I started off on Wall Street in corporate finance, and which was, I mean, I was working like 120 hours a week at least. It was insane. And then later on, I moved over to being an equity analyst, which was a little bit better, but the stress was definitely still there. And was it was it easy to leave that business? I think I got to a point where I realized I was making great money. I was very successful in what I was doing, but I felt like an empty
Mm,
shell, to be perfectly honest. And I think that I couldn't recognize at that time who I really was and what I really wanted because I was under, I think, a lot of programming influence from my family and also being in Hong Kong. Hong Kong is a very material focused place, or was then at least, right? And so I didn't know because I wasn't exposed to the arts so much. I wasn't exposed to any of this other stuff. And it got to a point where I was so depressed, essentially, and I couldn't understand why because every other angle, I looked like a very successful person, right? And this is really I had a breakdown, to be perfectly honest, during that time, and I had to really look deep and had a dark night of the soul, and that really started my passion for exploring consciousness, right? It started from my own pain of not just, like, wanting to understand, like, why is it that I'm in this hole? Even though ostensibly it looks like I should be perfectly happy. I should be the happiest person on the planet, but I'm not. And so it really started a long self-discovery and healing process. And through a lot of that is how I got in touch with a lot of spirituality, a lot of different modalities of healing and exploring what it means to be a human being. And I also accompanied that stress that I was under, really not being the person
mhm,
that I truly was, plus adding all those hours and being under a very stressful work environment, was that my health was also in decline and I had a lot of health issues. So all of those reasons and just basically all of those ailments drove me to basically leave the industry. I had to stop. I could not go on. Number 1 for my health and number 2 for my own sanity. And I needed something for my soul. I was very, very hungry, but I didn't know yet at that time what I was hungry for. So then it was like years of experimenting and learning and healing to finally get to the point where I was doing something that was, I would say, closer to my heart. So going to film was a first
mm,
step of exploring that. What does it mean? I mean, I went into film, both as a producer, as an actor, as just all aspects of what that meant, which was extremely helpful, actually. And it helped me delve into meaning making. What is truth? What is what is meaningful to me? How do I express that? Can I express that? Right? And that's a whole the arts are amazing that way because it really gets you out of the framework of the corporate
Hmm.
mindset. And I had to detox from that corporate mindset for a good, oh my God, a good 5 years at least for me to get out of the
Hmm.
to get out of the headspace of how I grew up and kind of deprogram myself. And then throughout, really, all the way up to today, it's been a beautiful consciousness expanding journey for which I'm deeply grateful. And a big aspect of that was actually plant
Hmm.
medicine.
Let me ask you this.
Mhm.
I find places like finance and perhaps even politics, and I have lots of friends in this world. I'm deeply embedded in the world of VC and technology and things like that. But finance in particular seems like, and in some ways, finance is the leading indicator for good and bad of where the world is going to go, right? And what's going to happen, right? Some would say the stock market is the consciousness of the global consciousness, again, for good and bad. You can sense the global anxiety and ambitions and aspirations and the politics of it all just by looking at the ticker of a couple of stocks, right? And
Right.
commodities. Why do you think finance is ripe for spiritual disruption? What about it makes it so pernicious but also susceptible? And I would and I want to kind of I want you to answer this from the perspective of like you, Stephanie, now speaking to the Stephanie at that time. And I'll just end this by saying that I think for a lot of people, I feel in those worlds, it's hard to trust yourself when you're having that sort of breakdown and go like, "Oh my god, maybe it's I'm on the wrong path. Hey, why don't I just get another drink? Why don't I go out again? Why don't I go party again? Maybe I'll feel better." Because that's what everybody around you is going to tell you.
Right. Wow, that is a very powerful and
Hmm.
challenging question. I'm gonna try and tackle that. So let's say let's go back. If if I was myself back at that moment where I was at the juncture of like, oh my God, I'm totally unhappy, and I instead went the other way, and I said, look, I'm just gonna ignore this because maybe I'm not making enough money. Maybe I should just get whatever buy some new whatever it is that will retail therapy, whatever it is that I think would make me happy that's outside of myself, right? Because most people who are, let's say, not who don't have a spiritual practice or maybe don't really have that ability to be in touch with their internal landscape will tend to look outside of themselves, right? So, okay, what's out there? And our society is also in a way for us to be consumerist driven, right? So we're always looking out to buy whatever the next thing that could make us happy because it
Hmm.
says, "Oh,
Hmm.
buy this and you'll feel great." So I think that even if people went down that road, let's say something, you're talking about someone in finance, I think it's a very short road. You'll realize, "Oh my god, I'm just getting digging myself in a deeper hole. I may have a few more drinks, but I
Hmm.
just feel much worse after, and my liver is gonna not be so great at the end of this." And I think why the body is so wonderful also is because it never
Hmm.
lies. So usually I always find the point where people kind of reach consciousness is even if they're not like at all like evolved consciously or anything like that, is through the body because it's something that we all of us have that if we start to feel sick in any area, right, physically, that is a very obvious wake up call. And if we ignore that, that tends to get louder and louder. So your little stomach ache, because you're stressed all the time, will become an ulcer. That ulcer, if it's untreated, you're just drinking more. Well,
Hmm.
guess what? It might burst. I mean, it'll keep kind of compounding until that knock on your door will become louder and louder until you absolutely have to listen to it, right? Maybe you have, God forbid, I don't know, like a heart attack or a stroke or something. And again, I'm exaggerating that a little bit, but that's how things build. And so I think the body is the first way to actually sense that okay, something is off kilter. And to listen to that is very important. And I think you mentioned earlier how do you why finance is such a rife area. Well, the world as we live in
Hmm.
today, right, is driven by money. We all know this. And the The way that our system is structured in this current paradigm is that those who control money control everything, essentially, right? People do not want to feel out of control or powerless. So they see money as the most powerful thing. Like to have money is the most powerful thing because if you have money, you are able to do virtually anything. So, and if you look also at the structure of our current system, teachers are amazing. They're so essential. They make a massive difference. They are paid the worst.
Yep.
Just an example, right? And those are like your formative years, and you're gonna have your children be taught by people who are not compensated at all for the level of job that they actually have. And yet you have people who are in finance, especially how financialized the stock market and all of the like our financial system is. So it's not even like in the way old yonder days when it was like, oh, you're buying a stock, oh, there's a company behind it. And these days, you're trading derivatives, it's
Hmm.
just
Hmm.
one swap over another, and you're just do you know what I mean? You're not actually creating value, you're actually making money
Right.
on money and how to say, financially structuring one particular product over another, but you're actually not creating any value for society, right? But guess what? It
Hmm.
pays. It pays again. So why is it so hard? I mean, it's an obvious question, but at the same time, I think that I think that that coupled with our current society again being consumer driven, we live in a debt-based economy.
Hmm.
We This economy is based on growth, debt-based growth, and if you look at the Fed policy, you look at you know what I'm saying? Like, it's all about driving consumerism. It's driving consumption. If we don't consume and God forbid if our economy and people don't consume more each day, then we're going that's it for the economy. And of course, you compare that with a limited resource planet that we're on, there's a real disconnect. So and yet we still are in this dilemma.
It's so funny, right? Because
And I think that
if you're having that one extra drink or a couple of more drinks, you're creating value and GDP. If you don't have that drink, you're actually extending your life and happiness. It's diametrically opposed to how the economy and system works, right? To sometimes how, and I mean, don't get me wrong, we need money, but I mean, the question here is, to your point, money is the proxy for control, and control for what? Ultimately, death. We're all gonna die.
yeah.
So this fake impression that somehow hoarding and having more money and having more material things will make sure that you are immortal or some shit like that. That's really the foundational assumption here, right? That
Yeah, no, I'm really glad you brought that up. It's the
yeah.
fear of death. The fear of death is just not living. It's
Mm,
not living. So you may have all those material things, but are you actually living a
mm-hmm,
meaningful life? I
mm-hmm.
don't. That's
That's
the
the
question,
question.
right? And I think we live thank you for I'm really appreciative that you brought that up because we live in a death cult. We do. It's the way we consume, it's the way we live. Finance, whether it's finance or not, we live in a very transactional society. There is no
Mm,
relationship, right? And I think that what plants really teach us, especially sacred and theogenic plants, is how not just healing, but how important it is and how it can help us thrive when we actually come into sacred relationship with through plants, with plants, and but it's what they're teaching us is how we treat each
mm-hmm,
other. Can we come into relationship with ourselves? Can we respect our own space and our own feelings and allow that to be, right? Instead of kind of pushing and suppressing and disassociating from parts of ourselves that we don't like, for example. So I think plants definitely teach us that. Kanna absolutely teaches that, especially because of that connection aspect that I talked about and how it basically leads to more emotional openness and empathy, hence empathogen and hence empathogenics. We're really double tapping on that because it's really what the world
mm,
needs, right? And so that connection and that understanding of how everything is connected, not just me to you, but us to the world and the planet, the animals, the insects that are all around us. We are a subset of life and we're a part of this amazing web of life. We are not its dominant owner. There's no such thing. And I think the sooner and the more we realize this, then at least we have some hope for humanity. I think that It's so fundamental, and I think a lot of the sense of loneliness, or you feel people, "Why do you drink? You drink to forget something. Are you really drinking maybe wanting to
Mm,
connect more?" But it doesn't, it's a depressant, right? So that, I think, really speaks to a lot of the depression and that feeling of isolation that human beings have today. And again, Kanna is a beautiful plant that completely helps you come into connection, which is why honestly I've dedicated myself to this mission. And our mission in Ka is actually to restore full spectrum aliveness for all beings. And that full spectrum aliveness is not just joy and happiness, but the full spectrum, including any anger, pain, sadness, because if we don't have that, it's not part of, that's not the full spectrum of what it means to be alive. And to be alive is to feel all of that.
mhm, mhm.
And it's a long way around to just say that I think when in any case, when we get overly obsessed with one aspect of life, because wealth, if you look at wealth, there are many pillars. There's relational wealth, society, social capital. You have, of course, financial, but then you have spiritual as well. You have health, all of that. It's looking at all of that, right? And you may have, let's say, an overabundance in one aspect, but then what about the rest? What about the rest? If you don't have all of that, there life becomes a lot less
I couldn't
meaningful.
agree with you more, and I think that's really beautifully said. You really touched on both the macro, the spiritual, but also what is existentially at risk, right? I think people who are lonely, disconnected, the world is in the state of absolute disarray because I think fundamentally because of those reasons, right? Now, I was going to ask you about your most meaningful psychedelic experience. Instead, I think what I'm curious about, actually, again from a very personal perspective, is as you've gone through your healing journey with plant medicines, facilitated or guided or accelerated by plant medicines, how has the identity that you grew up with, right, being a Hong Konger, right, and I know that sort of like mad dash and rush of Hong Kong, having been there, I found it really odd that when I went to Hong Kong, there were no benches anywhere,
What?
anywhere.
That's a really
It
good
was so
option.
odd. The only bench I found after hours of walking was near a Starbucks in a shopping mall. No benches. So that tells you everything. Either, well, some a friend of mine told me is because the government doesn't want you to congregate, which it could be partly true, but also that nobody feels the need to sit or stand still. Not until did I go to Kowloon did I'm like, oh my god, I can breathe. Holy shit, it's a different place. Coming back to this sort of the identity you grew up with, where you grew up, and then what your parents programmed into you, I don't believe most parents mean to be malicious, right? They're just playing out the same role that they had been instilled into.
Absolutely.
In the from the perspective of plant medicine and your healing journey, how has that identity and your relationship with your parents evolved?
Wow. So I just want to be clear. I did many, many years of my own healing work and a lot of spiritual work before I even encountered plant
Mm,
medicine about
mm.
11 years ago. So it's not, it would not be fair for me to say, okay, it's like plant medicine
Yeah. We
did
consider the
it.
healing journey in general.
I
Like, I mean, that's yeah.
Yeah, I think you do not, I think it was all of that was, I think, definitely part of my healing journey prior to plant medicine. And of course, like you said, I think parents are just afraid for us and they project their
Hmm.
fears onto us. And so they think, okay, what are the most, what can we teach our kids to make sure that they're going to
Hmm.
be okay? I think it was very challenging for me because I'm already a very I was a very different
Mm.
kind of little girl. And then I think I really just needed to break out of Hong Kong because I found Hong Kong very restrictive. Funny that you mentioned the benches. It's true. Even when I was little, you're right. There were never, it's not like, oh, it's a post to hand over. Now China, there's no benches. No, no, no. This was kind of always the case. You're absolutely right. And yeah, because people were just rushing here and to and fro. And nobody really contemplated this. There's no such thing. I didn't even know what it was. What was meditation? Even though in Chinese culture, there's Tai
Mm.
Chi, there's all of that. Yet I would say the Hong Kong Anglo-British culture that I grew up in, we had none of that. It was not, in my home, there was
Mm.
also none of that. So I think that rush, rush, rush aspect is definitely shaped me in a sense where I never even allowed myself to take a pause. And I think that it took me, at first I mentioned like I had a breakdown. And it took me many years to kind of go through that. I think the hardest part was probably the first 3 years of just Dark Night of
Mm,
the Soul, which is like horrible, and just really confronting the truth of who I was and my own feelings, right? Because I was very, very sad as a child, and I didn't even
mm,
know that. I didn't even know that until I had my
mm,
breakdown, right? I go, oh my God, I'm actually really
mhm,
depressed, right? And I was still depressed at that time. And then I was like, why am I depressed? So it was all, it was not easy, but it was, of course, well worth, and the were worth it. And the only way that I could do that. And I think it helped me. I went through a deep process of, first of all, acknowledging the pain. It's very important, right? So feeling all the pain of what I had suppressed, then kind of understanding why I was feeling the pain, like where I felt rejected or shamed. And then, okay, well, then can I forgive whatever, whoever it may be in my life, whether it's certain family members, whatever, can I
mm,
forgive that and accept that, of course, in love, that there is no, that's to understand that I'm an adult now. As a child, I experienced this, but of course, I understand where they're coming from. And but I could not have done that without feeling all the pain, and I think that's a step that people often skip because they intellectually want to just say, "Oh, yes, I'm gonna be so spiritual and so high and mighty." It's like, "It's okay, everything's okay." But we don't go
right.
through the pain, we don't go through the part, and I think that is absolutely, absolutely fundamental. We have to feel it in order to
Mhm,
process it. So that was huge, and that continues to be a big lesson for me. And that I think over time, you get to the appreciation and the gratitude, right, of actually having had these experiences. And I am so grateful to my family of having gone through that kind of a childhood. It shaped me. Otherwise, you and I wouldn't even be talking today,
mhm,
Rad. Like, I wouldn't even be on the consciousness track. I wouldn't be doing the Kanna, doing Empathogenics at all. So I'm deeply grateful to all those challenging moments that I had with my family. And it made me who
mhm,
I am, right? And so it comes to the point finally of acceptance and forgiveness, not just forgiveness, acceptance, but celebration and
right.
gratitude, of gratitude for what, why, and what happened, and accepting it, but also celebrating it and understanding that, hey, we're all here on a path. Each of our path is unique. Every person, and especially the people who cause us the most grief, they are our greatest teachers. They
Absolutely,
really, really are.
absolutely.
Right? And so it's like then you go, "Oh, wow." And then you can look at life with much more equanimity. Again, evenness of
Mm,
mind, right? And so it's not overly excited when something great happens, nor are you too upset when something horrible happens. Again, those are judgments in the moment that may not even necessarily be true, right? So, yeah, so it's been a wonderful journey.
beautifully said. And what's really interesting to me being on this podcast, a lot of us have who come from cultures that are very, very, very old, we've
Mhm.
lost connection to them because of colonization, immigration, migration, whatever you want to call it, trauma. None of this is new. So what's really inspiring to me is this act of remembering. But I don't think you can fully embrace that remembering until you fully embrace all of what life gives you, including painful experiences, including painful memories, right? You can define a good life by how rich your experiences have been, not just in the hedonic way, but you've felt the full spectrum of what it feels like to be a human being, right? From the depth of
Mhm.
sadness to the sort of like the highest highs and so on. Coming back to the last part of the interview, Stephanie, I mean, you mentioned a couple of times this is your life's mission. So I'm very curious. Tell me a little bit from the perspective of a female CEO, lessons from your life so far are you drawing from and instilling in building a company? That's number one. I think unfortunately, it's rare that there are many female CEOs, generally, never mind psychedelic or psychedelic adjacent spaces. Maybe there's proportionally more in wellness and health, generally speaking. But as a female CEO, what lessons are you drawing from to build a company? What do you want the company to represent, both as a sustainable business, right? That is profitable, it's growing, but one that's also respectful to the values you're trying to instill.
Thank you for asking the question. I came into this, the impetus for creating this company is very much from my passion for human evolution, for evolving consciousness. And I think that had I not had those years of spiritual learning and growth and practice, I could not be the CEO or the founder of Khoi Empathogenics. And I think this is true. I think we are going to be seeing that in the future as we continue, the most successful companies will be conscious companies. I just think we're at that turning point at this moment. And again, I'm deeply grateful for all the years of learning and practice and grounding that my own spiritual practices has given me. And so when I launched Ka, that has been my North Star. And what do I mean by that? And I think this has been a huge reason for the success so far of Ka is that whenever I've had to bring on a new employee or somebody who is a contractor, whoever it may be, big or small, it's always been really, really important to me that they share the same values of reciprocity, of understanding, of kindness, of empathy, of compassion, and that they also understand why it is so important to and what Ka is about, first of all, about not just healing, but helping people thrive through connection, through understanding that we are all one. And I don't want to make this sound so like it's not woo-woo even because it may sound like woo-woo to someone. And it's not because it's really grounded in this understanding of how important empathy is and how important it is to, number 1, manage a company and run a company with compassion and empathy, and of course, all the business acumen and all the business aspects and the best practices in running a business, but to also make sure that there's that balance between heart and mind. And what I mean, that's exactly Ka's
Mhm.
mission, right?
Mhm.
It's about, right, bringing more head-heart harmony, right? What does it mean to be more heart-centered? That's what that's what I've always wanted for everyone in the world. It's like, I'm not saying, "Hey, ignore the mind." I'm saying, "Great. Our minds are awesome. Our intellect is amazing. Can we ground it together with our heart so that when we make decisions,
Mm.
we're making decisions that are heart led, but then the mind is also like, okay, what is the best way we can execute this, or what's the best way we can grow, or whatever it is." So the same way that I I try to work with the most amazing people in whatever the field that they are in. I don't have an ego as little as I can in who's doing they're doing great, fantastic. As a as as a business owner, I think that it's so important to bring in the people who are smarter than
Mhm.
myself,
Mhm.
and I'm surrounded with people who are more talented than me, and I love how they take whatever I give them and run with it, and they always amaze me, and I'm so excited, right? And I don't care that I don't know how to do that. I love that I don't know how to do that and somebody else is doing it, right? That's the whole point. That's the whole point of delegation. So I think that's a huge part is just to stay humble and to really bring in the best talent that you can that's aligned with your mission. And same thing with and that alignment is really important because sometimes someone may look great on a resume, their belief system maybe
Right.
not so much. So so there's that. And I think that I mean, you mentioned this thing about identity earlier, which I think you're also from an ancient culture, and so am I. And what has changed over the years that, let's say, 20, 30 years ago versus now for me is that I identified maybe a lot more as someone who is Chinese from Hong Kong. I grew up this, all the whatever the identity
Mm.
tags have me be. I really don't even think of myself as any of that. I am that. It's all integrated into me, and all of that will be part of me. But who I am through this journey is it's some it's the me that keeps evolving, it's the me
Mm.
that is being. And so when I work with people, when I look at people, when I talk to them, I don't even see I see them as a soul. Okay, they happen to be Indian or they happen to be white or whatever it is, right? But that's like, okay, so what? Like it's yes, there's a story with that. I'm not saying to ignore the story, but I think that one of the things that evolving consciousness really helps us is to get past the
Mhm.
identity.
Mm.
Right, to integrate it, it's part of you, but to get to move beyond that and expand beyond that. And I think that being able to be successful, I think in running a conscious business, I think that that is a big aspect that is part and parcel of kind of going beyond that sort of ego realm, right? And what else can I say about being a CEO? I guess so much of what I do and my decision making it's this is gonna sound really woo again, but I'm just being honest. I sit and I meditate and it comes to me. Much is revealed to me. And of course, I'm gonna use all my Wharton. I'm gonna use all the ways that the business school has taught me to look at how to run a company. But what I have found that may be the case, and of course I'm doing that. But the spiritual aspect is massive for me, and especially in this company. And this is the first time I've actually said this on air to anyone. It's really what has guided me deeply is my own intuition and the guidance that I receive whenever I still myself and connect with what's greater than me.
I love all of that, and I couldn't agree with you more. I think what makes this space special, and you mentioned this, that this is part and parcel of the company and you, is that contemplation is built into it. And it's not to say that meditating tells you what the right thing to do is. For me, it feels like it tells you what you can live with, right? And then from that perspective, how do you do your best? Can't control for everything. In fact, there's very little we can control for. But are we doing our best?
Mhm.
Are we trying to do the right thing? And can we is that the thing that we want to live with, right? And most of us did what we did our best. I think the world would already be a much better place. But alas, that's the challenge and that's the opportunity. Stephanie, this was a brilliant, brilliant hour. Thank you so much for spending the time here and sharing your experience, outlook on life, and what you're building.
Thank you so much. It's been great, and I really am grateful because this was a this was a conversation. This was not an interview of any kind, and I loved the insights you also shared. I thank you for giving me the opportunity to share some of my deeper deeper feelings and
Pleasure
thoughts.
was all mine, and it's been really inspiring. This podcast was brought to life with the help of Carolyn Tripp on art and design. Thanks so much for listening to Minority Trip Report. If you're learning from or enjoying the podcast, please subscribe to MTR on YouTube at Minority Trip Report and follow us on Instagram at Minority Trip. It's a zero-cost way to support us and help us spread the word. Please also sign up with your email for new episode announcements, events, as well as our forthcoming newsletter. I'm your host, Raj Suraj. See you next time.